Well, very good evening. Can you all hear? Good. We have a lot to do in a short time. And tonight's empowerment and talk is about compassion, which is at the very heart of Tibetan Buddhism. In the actual practice and development of compassion, we try to make it something which is present not just when we meditate, but in everything we do in our lives, and especially in Dharma talks, which is why we start by turning our loving care to all beings, and we think that we're here for these hour or two this evening for all of them. In a very practical way, we think that by learning, by listening, by reflecting, by learning to be more open, caring people, then in the future, actually, we will have more to give to others. And in particular, we'll have more clarity of mind, more strength of conviction, of the dignity of our purpose in life, and more loving care. So I'd like you to try and stretch your minds out to think of all of the humans with whom we share this world, the animals, any type of conscious life you can imagine, and to try and dedicate our time together to all of their welfare. And while you're doing that, I shall groan away in Tibetan, and you probably won't understand a word, but you can be thinking of those things. Sanje chedang saje chanam la jancho badu dhane chapsanje dagi jinso jipe sanam je drola penchara sanje drapara sho daso semjen tamche lo choso drovare jinje laptu sol cholandu drovare jinje laptu sol lam tropa salvare jinje laptu sol Tropaye shesu chaware jinje laptu sol Palden sawe lama rinpoche dagi cheware bende denshola Kadrin champo gone jizonte kuson toje madrop saldu sol. Tonight's talk is in three parts, three very short parts. The first is about compassion. The first is about the nature of what's going to happen later on when Rinpoche comes, and empowerment, this empowerment. And then thirdly and mainly, I'll take you through the empowerment we'll receive this evening so that you'll understand some of the different things that are happening, and in particular, you'll know what to do when the time comes, which is very important. But first about compassion. Now, it's quite embarrassing to talk to people about compassion because I'm sure many of you are much more compassionate than I am. So who am I to tell you about compassion? We live in general in quite a compassionate society, and there have been some amazing changes in our world in the last 20 years where we've developed an awareness, much more awareness of the rest of the planet, of the people within our own society, and I think in general we are moving in a more caring direction. It's not as though I'm telling you about something you don't know about. For instance, when you come to Buddhism and you come to meditation, very often that's something totally new. It's a total discovery. But compassion is something we all have. No one is without compassion, but who here can say they have enough compassion? So we need more, don't we? A lot more. There's no limit to the amount of compassion we need. And in particular, if one wants to liberate one's mind and one's life, if one wants that clarity and beauty and nobility of being that the Buddha attained, then compassion is really everything. In fact, the Buddha himself said, if one could take all of my teachings, and my gosh, there are so many of them, 45 years, 100 books of teaching, said if you could take all of those, put them into one thing, as though you could look at it in the palm of your hand and say, that's what it's all about, then it would be compassion. All of our Buddhist training is for the opening up, the strengthening, development of our compassion. If we had time, I'd like to go around the room and ask you what compassion means for you. Sometimes we do this in teachings, a very quick fire, first thought, what's compassion? Bum, 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 bum. And I think we won't do that, but if we did it, I think you find for most people, compassion's a sort of a feeling. When you feel compassion, it's a nice feeling. It's a feeling of sympathy and care. And it's mainly something you feel when you become aware of suffering. In Buddhism, we define compassion in terms of suffering. It's the mind's response to suffering, and we define it as a longing to be able to alleviate suffering, but not only that, to alleviate the causes of suffering, of future suffering. And what I'd like to present to you tonight is what you might not have thought about compassion, and what is very, very strongly developed in the Buddhist teaching on compassion. And when we look at suffering, we split it into three areas. And this means our compassion is three levels of response to those three areas. Now, the first one is very obvious. It's when somebody is hurting, crying, physically they're in trouble, or mentally they're distressed, then this triggers in most good human beings a sort of a response where you want to help. That's really the first level of suffering. It's called of compassion, the response. It's triggered by the vision of suffering. I think that's what most people's idea of compassion is. Even the word compassio, to feel with the other. But there's a second level of suffering where actually what you see doesn't look bad at all. It has more of a, these smiley things, it has more of a than a sometimes. It's when it doesn't look as though there's something wrong. But the whole situation, because of the very nature of existence, is brewing up trouble for the future. That's one aspect of it. In general, if we look more carefully, then it's the compassionate response that's there because we understand cause and effect. Now, this is a very Buddhist notion. It's based on reincarnation. The very way life works is that what we are now is because of what we did in the past, and what we're doing now is going to create what we are in the future. Now, from this point of view, let's take a very simple example. If one reads about a terrible dictator who's oppressing people in a country, and we see buildings being bulldozed, people being tortured, we feel compassion for the victims. But a Buddhist would feel equal compassion for the dictator. Now, that dictator might be having a whale of a time, be gathering in the riches from what he or she does, however it works. But for a Buddhist, because we think about causality, then we think, my gosh, those people are suffering, but how that person is going to suffer as a result of what he's doing. And I think this would apply to a Christian as well. If you believe in an afterlife, then you'd think not only would you feel for the victims, but you think, my gosh, where is that aggressor taking himself with his actions? There's another side to this too. It's all to do with impermanence, and when we cling to things. And we cling to things, then at first something gives us a nice experience. We fall in love, or we like a bit of a drink, or something like that. Something gives a nice feeling. But once we start clinging to it, then things go wrong. So relationships break down, people drink too much, all sorts of things happen. And for a wise person who's seeing the beginning bit, the fun, the niceness, but who knows how the human mind works, how we get involved with things, how we have such hopes and fears, then already there's compassion, even though there's a smile on the face. I don't have too much time, but I'd like to give you a silly example, but I think it really puts the finger on it. It comes from my childhood, in a time after the war when chocolates were rare. And my elder brother, coming home from his military service in Germany, brought back a beautiful box of chocolates. And I ate one, when nobody was looking, and two, and three. Sick as a rat, as they say. Sick as a rat. Now, a wise person, if there was a CCTV camera in there, watching the child with that grin, Christmas, everything like that. But because it's inevitable that 10 minutes later it's going to end up in the loo with like this, you see. Now, it's a silly example, but there are so many things in life where, in trying to make ourselves happy, we in fact get ourselves into a lot of long-term trouble. And a wise mind seeing that feels compassion. Anyway, the second sort of suffering is, second sort of compassion is a response. It's called the compassion that comes through wisdom, or the compassion that comes through Dharma. We have more idea of what's going on. The third sort of compassion is very, very deep. Most people can't get it. It comes when we have profound and sacred experience. And we realize that actually every single human being has the possibility of that experience. When we touch the deep joy of meditation, the profound peace we can attain, when our mind opens up to the amazing blessing that's possible, and one realizes that a human life is the most wonderful potential, and then looks around and sees people hurting, crying, in pain and confusion because they've not awakened this treasure, then that is the deepest compassion, and it just happens. However deep your own experience is, then that deep is the compassion you have for everyone who could have it, but who's not yet uncovered it. Now, one of the other things I'd like to say about compassion is that compassion shouldn't just be a feeling. In our Western world, we are very spoiled, and just to sit comfortably at home and feel compassion for the world isn't compassion. If you don't act on your compassion, it's just a luxurious thought. It's a sweet feeling. It's not genuine if you don't act. So compassion in action is very important. In this town, anywhere you go, there are people who are lonely, who are hungry, who need friendship, who need support. And so just to sit in one's own comfort and let them be in their discomfort is not very human, actually. So compassion is something that we need to really think about in depth. It's not a feeling, it's a reality of one's life where one is in fact more aware of what's happening in our brothers and sisters who are the other human beings with whom we share this life. And we can't just leave them to suffer. And the way we develop that in Buddhism is to try and feel for each and every being as though they're as dear to us as the very, very dearest person in our own lives. Now, in the Tibetan system, that was always mum. So always just think of every sentient being as your mother. In the West, not everyone has easy experiences with their parents, so we have to say we try and feel as dearly for each person as we do for the dearest person in our life. And then you just can't leave it to happen. You can't know that there's someone around the corner who needs help and just think, yeah, but feel sorry for them. Sit in your house and feel compassion isn't compassion. So compassion in action is very important. Now, this moves us on to what's happening this evening. We're receiving an empowerment, and an empowerment is what needs to happen so that we can do some of the more effective, profound practices within Buddhism, within Tibetan Buddhism. And in those practices, we actually become the living embodiment of compassion. We do this through using our imagination. We visualize ourselves as perfect compassion. To someone who's coming quite new to Tibetan Buddhism, it's full of all sorts of weird images, all sorts of things that you didn't grow up with and that look, well, sometimes pretty over the top, don't they? If you've seen some of them. Tonight we're receiving, for instance, the empowerment. It's actually two empowerments in one. It's what empowers you or entitles you to do the practice of Avalokiteshvara, Chenrezig, which is the main compassion practice, in two ways. One is a form that has 4 arms, and one is a form that has 1,000 arms. So already that's strange, isn't it? Imagining that you have 4 arms. Now, why would you sit on a cushion and imagine that you've got 4 or even 1,000 arms? Not to mention all of those heads. You know, why would you do that? If we talk about it in a simple way, and it's not really true, we'd say it's symbolic. But these practices, they come from the great sacred purity that's timeless. They just come into the minds of very, very awakened beings as the very perfect and natural expression of compassion. And then because they had that vision, they turn that into a practice that we can do. And it's very effective. The main thing is it works. Actually, the bottom line is that it works. It's like my telephone number. I won't give it to you, but if you had it, you just go beep, beep, boop, beep, boop, 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 and I'm on the other end. Now, why that should happen, that's just the number. You dial any other number, you won't get me. You dial that number, you're through to me. When we set our mind in the way that these visionaries have seen, and we use our imagination and our prayers and many other things in the right way, it attunes us to a compassion that we never experienced before. It opens the door to a compassion that can just grow and grow and grow. When we look into that compassion, we see it's not just a woolly feeling of I love everybody. It's a skill. It's a skill. We find that if you really want to live as a compassionate being, you need many skills. You need to be very generous and open. To give of yourself is one thing. You need patience, because helping people is not easy. You need a great deal of patience to cope with all of the frustration that comes with it. One needs wisdom, because stupid help is no help. The wiser one is, the better one can help. In Buddhism, one needs meditation, because that gives one a depth that really gives one a power to feel deeply what's wrong with the other person. It gives one a lucidity and a stability whereby instead of it just being a human interaction, you can listen in quietness. You can really feel what's needed. Many, many skills like this. And somehow they're all represented in what we visualize. That's the beauty of it. So when we have 4 arms, our arms, our hands, they're so useful. We create, we touch, we feel. They're precious. So when we have the 4 arms, the way we reach out and touch and help beings is through 4 things: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity or impartiality. This impartiality that loves everyone the same. They're like our 4 main tools, if you like. So that's why we visualize ourselves with the four arms. And everything in what we visualize in that way shows us the ethics, the right ethics of our conduct, the patience, the meditation, and so on. all of these skills together, and in particular when we meditate on Chenrezig, which is tonight's one, you have a beautiful, kind, smiling face. Now, just training in that is a marvelous thing in itself. We don't go through life miserable, cynical, critical. We don't look at other people like this. We look on everyone, and we train in feeling this face of, when you meditate, you become the Buddha. Your face has all of the relaxation, the kindness, the peace, looking with eyes filled with loving care and wisdom that understand. Just training in that part is a marvelous thing. And as we do the whole visualization, everything has meaning. Everything is part of this very, very perfect jigsaw puzzle of this thing we call compassion, with all of its living skills. Now, you're very fortunate this evening. The person who's giving you this empowerment is himself really the embodiment of compassion. I think if you know anything, even just about Akong Rinpoche's humanitarian work, through him, tens of thousands of children have an education. Thousands and thousands of people have been saved from poverty, from sickness. So he's not a lama just sitting down saying, feel compassionate, it's nice. He's somebody whose life is a living, wonderful example of actually giving yourself and becoming a servant of the world. So I think we're very fortunate. Now, an empowerment is something we need in order to do the practice, but that having been said, the way that Akong Rinpoche gives the empowerments, they are open to everyone, Buddhist or non-Buddhist, as what we call a blessing. It means if you feel that by meeting up with him, with this Tibetan lineage, which he really represents, if you feel there's some sort of spiritual goodness, then that's all there is. You come here tonight, there's a ceremony, a meeting, and let's hope that some goodness comes through it. But apart from that, an empowerment is actually what entitles you to practice. And it needs somebody who holds, when there was this first original vision of Chenrezig as the embodiment of compassion, that was passed on from the person who had it to their main disciples, and they passed it on to their main disciples. We have a pure lineage through time where the whole meaning and inner depth of this practice has been maintained through the centuries until Akong Rinpoche and the other masters today who hold it. Now, amongst other things, they hold a key. We all have compassion and the potential for compassion within ourselves. But somehow when you receive empowerment, it opens up the key. So when you do the practice, it actually bears fruit. And if you did the same technique and practice without the empowerment, somehow it doesn't work so well. This is why we need to receive an empowerment from a pure lineage and a good lineage master. Tonight, the empowerment ceremony is based on this 1,000-armed, 11-headed form of Chenrezig, which is special to a practice we call Nyungne, which is a 2-day practice with fasting, particularly useful for lay people with busy lives who can't just go off and devote their life to spirituality, but can go for 2 days and have a total spiritual immersion in this practice, which is based on generosity, compassion. Very excellent practice that we do in some of our centers. Now, the empowerment is for that, but at the same time, it's also the empowerment you need if you're going to do the very widespread practice called Rodon Kachapma of 4-arm Chenrezig, which we do in nearly all of our Tibetan Buddhist centers in the UK and in other countries. So it's very much what people like. Buy one, get one free. It's 2 for the price of 1. It's 2 things together. That's very, very, very wonderful. So it's an empowerment in that sense, And the way the empowerment works is through your openness and receptivity on your side, and through the fact that the Lama who gives it really is what we call a lineage holder. In themselves they have the realization, and they have received this transmission from their teacher, he got it from his teacher. There's a pure unbroken line from the Buddha. So from this side of the stage things are fine, and quite what it gives to you, beside the fact that it empowers you to do the practice and turns the key in the lock, whether it actually brings you in the moment a big blessing or not depends a lot on your openness. And in particular, the way we receive empowerment is by visualizing what we're receiving the empowerment for. So I'll take you through the ceremony so you know what's going on quite briefly. This is not a very complicated empowerment. All the empowerments start with an opening section, which is what we call the creation of a sacred and protected space. And so we feel that this school hall, it's a school hall, isn't it? Yes. This school hall in which becomes a very pure and protected place. Now, whoever you're sitting next to and however you feel about them during the whole course of the empowerment, we try and feel love and sympathy and respect for all of us gathered here, and we feel that we can relax with each other. What the Lama does at the beginning of the ceremony is, with the strength of his mind, to create it's like a protective sphere. Now, the reason we make this protective sphere is because, some of us, if you're like me, if you lived a bit, we have damaged hearts. We've opened up and it's not always been successful. We're a bit wary of sort of opening up and being receptive because you never know what's coming in. And so the idea is that you feel that during the empowerment there's no disturbing negative energy from the outside that can trouble you, and here you can relax with the other people you are with and with the Lama and become receptive to the transmission of this empowerment. So the Lama's first duty is to create this feeling of a sacred space and a protected space. Then, if you know it, together with the Lama, we do the Vajrasattva mantra, which is a mantra of purification. So we feel ourselves that we are going through a sort of a washing of ourselves so that we move into a clean, new space. Then the attendant, Tashi, will offer piles of rice, which symbolize offering the universe to the Guru for the empowerment. Now, the real meaning of this is the following. The world is full of objects. Most of it's junk. Useful junk, but it comes and it goes. It's impermanent. It's just things. There are some wonderful things in this universe, but they're just things. So we imagine we have really the most marvelous things in the whole cosmos, and the feeling we should have is, even if I had all of that, I would give it very, very willingly to receive this practice, because this practice will make me a more loving, compassionate, wise person. And that is worth more than anything. In our modern world, we are beleaguered with things. Things have become so important. We are the slaves of objects. They're clever objects, but we spend so much time earning them, looking after them, protecting them, insuring them. Things have become too important. So we feel that even the most wonderful things are not worth as much as real compassion. So we feel like we're offering the mandala of the universe in order for this gift of teachings about how to develop our loving, kind hearts. Then after that, Rinpoche will talk a bit in Tibetan, he chants, and what he's telling us is actually the history of this practice, how it started, how it's travelled through time, through a lineage of lamas, until the present day. And what he'll be saying is that there were many, many practices of compassion throughout Buddhism. So many of them went to Tibet from the 8th century onwards. On all the various levels of Tantra or Vajrayana, we find specialized practices for compassion. But this particular one is very potent. He's talking here about the one we use for the Nyungne practice. It comes from a lady practitioner who was a nun. Her story is fantastic. We don't have the time for it today, but she was a princess who became a nun. She was a princess who developed leprosy. She became a nun, a recluse, and she had the most marvelous and profound spiritual experiences, and then development of those experiences until she herself was enlightened. And she gave us this practice, and it's been passed down through time. So her name in Tibetan is Galongma Paumo, or in Sanskrit Bhikshuni Lakshmi. And it's this tradition of her practice that Rinpoche is empowering us for this evening. At one point he'll ask us to repeat some Tibetan after him, which is a request for the empowerment. And we'll repeat things in Tibetan in general, because that's the way it's been done over the centuries. He feels confident with that the transmission through time in Tibetan has been pure. If we do it in English, who knows? Maybe okay, maybe not. So we're playing safe. We're doing it in Tibetan because it's fine. So we'll ask you to repeat in Tibetan for the request. And then, because this practice belongs to what we call Vajrayana, visualizations, mantras, and so on, then all of Vajrayana Buddhism has to be founded in the good, loving, kind heart of what we call the Bodhisattva of Mahayana Buddhism. So we need to remind ourselves of our Mahayana Buddhism, of our promise that we make in that Buddhism to dedicate our lives to the welfare of all other beings. And that in itself, this good heart of the Bodhisattva, has to be based in the ethics, the understanding of cause and effect and so on of the Buddhism that we find all over the world. So for that we need in particular to remind ourselves of our refuge. So what we do, we do the prayers of refuge and bodhicitta, and also a prayer called the 7-branch prayer, which you may know, as a way of preparing our mind for the refuge. So we take, for the empowerment, so we take refuge, which means we place our confidence in enlightened beings and their teaching. We give rise to the noble heart of the Bodhisattva, turning our loving care towards all beings. Then we do the 7-branch prayer, which brings great positivity of mind. And then we make another request. This time we're asking for this particular empowerment. The first request is more like asking the teacher, please give me empowerment, give me initiation. The second request is, please give me this initiation for the Bhikshuni Lakshmi practice of Nyungne. And then we move on to the empowerment itself. It's in 3 parts. The first part takes place with, we call it a bumpa. It looks like Aladdin's lamp, if you're not used to it. It's a pot with a very long spout, and today it probably has flowers in the top, that varies. But anyway, it takes place with the bumpa. Now, in the actual empowerment, we try our best to visualize that three things transform. This is what really enables the transmission to come to us. We try and imagine that we ourselves transform, the Lama who gives the empowerment transforms, and that the objects of empowerment transform all into sacred objects. And they transform into Chenrezig. So first we visualize that we ourselves and the Lama become Chenrezig. Now the description of Chenrezig is very complicated. There's not even the time to read through it. And if I read through it, you wouldn't remember a thing probably. But try and imagine yourself, if you know Chenrezig as Chenrezig. If you don't know Chenrezig, imagine that you become a perfectly enlightened being whose presence is the very presence of compassion, perfect compassion, enlightened compassion. And in particular, if you know how to visualize Chenrezig, we imagine that in three places we have three lights, white one in the forehead, red one in the throat, blue one in the heart, and these are the very essence of our body and speech and mind. And from those places, white light and red light and blue light radiates out through the cosmos, requesting all the enlightened beings to send their power and their blessing so that this place, our own body, everything is filled with their own real compassion. And that returns in the form of many, many forms of Chenrezig, some large, some small, and they fall like snow dissolving into a lake. So it's like all of the Buddhas send their compassion in the form of Buddhas, and these dissolve into us, into the Vajra Master, into Akong Rinpoche, and into the objects of empowerment, filling them with the body, speech, and mind blessing of enlightened beings. Then, once we've done that, and you'll know and once we've done that, then Rinpoche first gives us the bumpa, the vase empowerment, and he'll do this by holding up the bumpa and reciting in Tibetan. Now, if you can, you imagine that that pot is a perfect microcosmos in which is Chenrezig, Buddha of compassion, and that when, as Rinpoche holds it up, that the nectar of compassion comes from that Buddha, and that the vase pours water onto the top of your head. It sort of, the water that's in the vase fills up your body with purity and compassion, and then it overflows from the top of your head. On your head is the crown of the five Buddha families, and the compassion overflows to all beings. So if you can, you imagine that while Rinpoche is actually holding up the vase, and it's that part of the empowerment that empowers you afterwards to do the visualization of Chenrezig. We think of it as something which purifies our past errors that we've made with our body, all the damage we've done with our body to ourselves, to others. We think of an empowerment as like a new start, a great purification that gives us a new, fresh start. So that's for the body. The next part of the empowerment, the second part, is the speech empowerment. This is mainly the transmission of the mantra, and Rinpoche does this by turning a crystal rosary, turning the beads out in our direction, and he'll give you the transmission of two mantras, the one for the Nyungne practice and the one for the regular practice. Now, if you can, you imagine that the very power and presence of the mantra is actually in Rinpoche's heart, and the power of the mantra in the form of syllables of the mantra comes up and out through his mouth, and into your mouth, and down into your heart, and that's how you receive the speech transmission of mantra. So it's like a whole garland of letters, the very feeling of which is something sacred and compassionate, and that comes into, from his heart to your heart, through the mouth. The third part of the empowerment is, and so in a similar way, we think that that gives us a fresh start with our speech. It purifies our past errors of speech, and it empowers us to use the mantra of Chenrezig. The third part is the mind empowerment. This is actually, it's given as Rinpoche holds up a card with a little flower painted on it. One thing that Chenrezig holds is a flower, a lotus flower. And actually we imagine when he holds that up that there's a whole flow of the various attributes that the thousand-armed form of Chenrezig holds. There's a flow of all of these different things that he holds to ourselves. And it's like all of the various skills of compassion, you know, all the things you need, the patience, the power, the friendship for people, all of the many skills of compassion are transmitted to us. It's like a rain of lotus flowers, of all the things that Chenrezig holds. Now, this is actually the mind transmission. It symbolizes the compassionate heart, the compassionate mind of Chenrezig, which is transmitted to us from the Vajra Master. And that enables us to meditate on the deepest nature of compassion, which is shunyata, or voidness. We think that it purifies all of our past mistakes of mind and gives us a fresh start with our mind to move forward from this evening onwards with a compassionate relationship to everyone, and in particular one that never will harm anybody ever again. Really, moments like empowerments, they're terrific times where you can make yourself a promise. The very essence of the Buddha's teaching is non-harm. In one way or another, we all hurt other beings, even if it's just spraying your roses, killing mosquitoes. People who live with each other, often the people you love the most are the ones you hurt the most with your speech. We say things that are not kind. Empowerments are wonderful times to think, I don't want to be like that anymore. I want to act with nobility, dignity, and finesse, and be a really, truly compassionate, kind human being. So, if you can, that will be marvelous. Now, I think I've used up most of my time, but there's a little bit of time for questions, if you do have any. Oh, let me tell you about the empowerment itself, sorry. It's very important. When you come up, so Rinpoche gives the 3 stages of empowerment by holding up the objects. And if you can, you imagine, you visualize the transmission coming from those objects. Then at the end, we all come up in a line one by one to actually receive a physical contact with those objects of transmission. Now, usually when we do this, we come up with offerings, and very often it's a white scarf, one of these Tibetan white scarves, which is a symbol of the purity of one's own mind and being. So if you come up and you have a scarf, then someone will very nicely relieve you of that scarf. In some ceremonies, you get the scarf back. In an empowerment, you don't. You actually offer it and you give it. So when you come up, you can offer your scarf, and then Rinpoche will touch the bumpa, this pot, onto your head. So lean your head forward a little bit. He'll touch the bumpa on the head. And then he'll pour a little bit of the content, which is sort of saffron water type thing, which if you remember from the empowerment, is the transmission of the body blessing of all the Buddhas. It's the one that fills you up with the nectar of compassion and wisdom and overflows at the top of your head. So if you can remember that, that's good. But usually we put our hands like this to receive the liquid. sometimes you get a few drops, sometimes it's rather a lot. So usually you need to get it quickly, otherwise it starts dribbling on the floor. So we come up, you bend your head for the blessing of the Wumpa, and then offer your hands like this. You get a few drops of the content of the Wumpa, which you drink. That's the main thing, you drink it. It's become a habit in empowerments that people sort of wipe off the rest on the top of their head as a blessing, but it's not part of the ceremony. It's just people do that. People do that. Now, probably with the Wumpa will be the rosary, the mala that Rinpoche uses to transmit the speech blessing, and also the little card, which is the mind blessing. So that's mainly how you receive contact with the objects. You come up, bend your head, offer your hands, and then I think afterwards, once you move on, you'll be given what we call a blessing cord. These are cords which come from the very head of our tradition, His Holiness the Karmapa, and he consecrated and blessed them, and that's what Rinpoche will be giving you, I think, after the empowerment. Okay. Any questions? Good. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. I hope you enjoy this evening's ceremony and that it means something for you, but more than anything else, I really hope that it develops your compassion, because a compassionate life will give you more joy than anything in this universe. And actually, when we give ourselves to others, we don't give ourselves at all, we gain. And those who live in compassion are really happy human beings. And I hope this evening helps you along that journey to compassion, whichever way you're following. Thank you so much.